Before I let each of the panel members introduce themselves, I just want to set the context a little bit. Yet again, someone has gotten together and done a survey and a study about women in corporate America. This time it was McKinsey & Company and leanin.org. And the results of that will surprise none of you. They addressed corporate America as well as, I guess, inclusive of the legal environment. And I think everybody knows that we have lots of associates that enter into our firms, and the pipeline narrows as you get closer to partnership, and then even more when you get into leadership. And so it always seems like bad news, excuse me, when we're talking about women in corporate America. But I want to show the opposite side of it a little bit and talk about the good news, and particularly about this community here in Cleveland, because Cleveland is not only a city of champions with the Cavaliers, the Lake Erie Monsters, and don't everybody cry, almost the Indians, but it also seems to be a place that really fosters the growth and development of women. And I would just ask you to look around a little bit. We've got Beth Mooney, CEO of one of the major banks in the United States. For a number of years, the president of the Fed here in Cleveland has been a woman, first with Sandy Pianalto, then now Loretta Mester. We've got a number of GCs. You saw the earlier panel with Jerry and Kathy and Rhonda. We've got women who are heads of law firms. I'm proud to say that at my own, Thompson Hine is headed by Debbie Reed. Many of the major law firms here in Cleveland are headed by women, including Jones Day, Squire Patton Boggs, and again, my own Thompson Hine. And as I think you saw through the speakers today, we have many, many women who are doing important things, whether it's in public service, in law firms, or what have you. And I think we're sort of bucking the trend here in Cleveland. And one of the reasons that we're doing that is because we have men like the four that we have on the stage with us today. And I know that you're thinking of others that could be on that list. And I think if you gathered all of them together and asked them how they got to where they were going and how they got to their positions, they'd have different answers. But one, I think, would resonate with all of them, and that is that they took responsibility for their own career and for driving their own career success. So all day long, we've been talking with other women about the things that they've done, but now we're going to talk with the men, and we're going to talk with them about what are the things that they have done to support women? What things do they see that women do very well and that make them very well suited for partnership and for leadership positions? And we're going to have some awkward conversations about what we don't do so well and what we can improve on. And so with that, I'd like to have each of them give a minute or two about themselves and what they're doing here, and then we will launch into the panel. So if I can start with you, Jim, please.
Thank you all for including me. Is the mic on? Is it working all right? I'm excited to be with you today and flattered to be in the company of these distinguished gentlemen. It also gave me the opportunity to think back as to how did I get involved in making women successful, and it goes back to 1975. It was International Women's Year, and I was supporting the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation's task force on the status of women, often done in Canadian and U.S. business back then. I interviewed one-on-one probably 200 women and 200 men, and I was absolutely astounded and shocked at what I found about the way that women were treated. And we all have lonely times, men or women, in our lives, but the degree to which the way that creative place worked made women feel isolated and alone and without opportunity, radicalized me. So I then ended up writing a series of articles in the Financial Post, wrote a book called Women in Business, A Shocking Waste of Human Resources. And that sort of started me on, I guess, doing the math. That's quite a while of trying to make some progress and be helpful to women. So thank you for causing me to revisit those, and I've got 7 or 8 coaching tips for later when we talk.
Great, thank you. Paul.
I guess I want to start out by saying I'll probably offend somebody along the way today.
It'll probably be one of the 3 of us.
Might be. It's not malicious, and I probably lost half the crowd by saying it's not malicious. And I don't really want to talk about what I think. I'm not an expert. But I do want to kind of tell my story and try to relate comments to my story and observations I get from colleagues and observations I get from coaching and observations I get from different examples I see every day. I've had some great coaching for this afternoon. It starts with my wife Jill, who's a Case Western Reserve University 1979 law school graduate, and for 19 years, I guess, worked at the Cleveland Fed. The last 6, she was general counsel at the Cleveland Federal Reserve Bank. She has coached me well. I work with a number of extraordinary people at the bank. I'm just going to highlight 3 of them. My partner day to day is Tammy Battanti, and I learned so much from Tammy as we work together. I get to work with Kristen Baird Adams. Many of you may know Kristen. Extraordinary colleague and the best horizontal thinker I've ever met in my life. And then a great relationship manager in our corporate banking area, a trusted colleague and friend, Pamela Rose, has helped me get ready for today as well. So, my comments are kind of going to be, I think you'll find them to be more about personality perhaps than even gender. But that's kind of where I landed as I was thinking about this stuff. I was struck, Rhonda mentioned something in the last panel about, kind of focusing on what's common. And hopefully you'll hear some of that in my comments today. The one event I would argue, just real quickly, Catherine, the one event I would cite as really kind of kick-started me, the kick was in my back, but it kick-started me into thinking about this topic and acting on this topic, was in 1991. I was leading a corporate banking team at the bank at that time, and I worked with a terrific colleague by the name of Diane Rooney. This was in the George 41 W. Bush H.W. Bush administration. And kinder and gentler was a phrase that was often used. And Diane came into my office one day and said, this place is a fraternity house and it's got to be run in a kinder, gentler way. And she was spot on. And she, trying to think of the right verb to use, she got me to, in a variety of different ways, she got me to assemble the entire corporate banking team, and those who were there, and there's only a few of us left, but still refer to it as the kinder and gentler speech. And it made a difference. It was a big difference.
Thanks, Paul. David.
I'm David Goodman, and I was tremendously pleased when Kathy asked me to do this, whatever Kathy Brandt would ask me to do. The answer was already yes before I knew what the question was. But
He did say that I hadn't met hello.
I didn't mean for this intro to be a Squire Patton Boggs puff speech, but I have benefited so tremendously throughout my career, my first 20 years at Calfee, and now almost in January 20 at Squire Patton Boggs, formerly Squire Sanders. And I couldn't have a better tableau to remind me of how much I have benefited from my women colleagues than to see Mary Ann Jorgensen, who, when I joined the firm, was already then in charge of the firm's corporate department, which was an extraordinary thing. It shouldn't have been so extraordinary, but it was in the mid-1990s. To see my successor as our office managing partner, Michelle Connell, who took over for me after 9 years in that role, and then to see some of my most junior women colleagues, and to appreciate how much I have learned from them, I hope conveyed some benefit to them. But as Jim was saying, I think I started my career assuming in the mid-70s that by 40 years later, issues about women's advancement in the career would have been something we'd look back on as a historical curiosity, not as something we were still grappling with well into the 21st century. But we are. And so I hope I've done my small part, and I'm proud if our firm has done more than its small part to keep advancing that cause.
Thanks, David. And David Hooker.
I'm David Hooker. I'm Kathy's partner. I had no choice. I'm happy to be here. I was the managing partner of Thompson Hine from 1997 to 2012. And I've got 41 years in the practice. I'm a little more senior than David. And as I was thinking about this, and I love history, so the perspective that I can't avoid thinking about is when I started at Thompson Hine, there were, I think, 75 lawyers. There was one woman associate. The recruiting committee had not long before I got there been renamed the new lawyer committee from the new man committee. My law school class had 20% women. It was extraordinary. This was 1975. It was extraordinary that Berkeley, I went to Stanford, and Berkeley across the bay had 50% women. I mean, everybody talked about that as some kind of major achievement that there were that many women. My career at the firm, I've had different management positions before I became managing partner, and you know, as I was thinking about this, I had these women's issues would kind of track this whole thing. I was head of the Lawyer Personnel Committee, which is our associates committee, back in the late 80s, and that's when, you know, the whole maternity leave thing came up, and how do we deal with that, so I bring that perspective for whatever it's worth as we talk through this today.
Great, thanks very much. So before we get started, in the interest of full disclosure and before I get outed by WikiLeaks, Jim Bennett is my significant other.
I had to say yes as well. I said yes gladly.
And beyond that, I only sent some of the panelists the questions in advance, not all of them. We would particularly like this session to be interactive, and so I would ask that if you have questions along the way, please don't save them for the end. Let's have the conversation and do it in the middle. If you have comments or if you'd like to add on to what one of our speakers has said, I would encourage you to do that. I would particularly, however, encourage you to do it at either the standing microphone here or at a wandering microphone that Bridget has in the back as we are recording this. And if you just yell out your comment, we won't hear it, and I'm sure it's something we're going to want to hear. So, no throwing of vegetables unless they're rotten and they don't hurt when they hit. I'd like to start you gentlemen off with a question about why it is that you support women. You know, at this point in time, diversity and gender diversity is at the top of almost everybody's list of something that has to be done in corporate America. There's been a lot of talk about it. As you have said, the needle hasn't moved a whole lot on that, but I'd like to hear each of your perspectives about why it is that you think it's important that you support women. Maybe, Paul, I can start with you?
Sure. A number of reasons, just to settle in on a couple. And it was the last panel talked about it as well, which is just the diversity of thought. A diverse group provides diversity of thought. You will get to a better answer. There's that aspect to it. Importantly, in our business, the fastest growing segment of business formation that we are able to bank is women-owned businesses. Typically smaller businesses, that's fine. It's a big part of what we do in the market. And for us to be successful, clearly we need to have a workforce that represents our client base. We're not where we want to be by any stretch. We work at it all the time. And for that reason, I think it's important to make certain that we're really having the development discussions with everyone in our firm, but certainly the women in our firm, to be able to track them into an area maybe they hadn't thought about, which is banking women-owned businesses. That's an important part of it. The other, and this is maybe a subset of the diverse thinking, decision making. We are a much more regulated business today than we ever have been. I suspect, given the fact our industry seems to shoot itself in the foot, there's more coming down the road. And the way in which we need to think through issues is really different today than it's ever been. And a deliberate approach to thinking and a diverse approach to thinking is what will be table stakes in how we think about our business and how we move forward as a firm.
Yes, I echo everything Paul said. Particularly from a firm management perspective, I guess I would get back to my other point about still being somewhat befuddled about not that we've made no progress, but how far we have left to go, and that is we just can't abide any waste of talent. And we look at less developed countries in which women, for whatever reason, cultural, religious, whatever, are oppressed, and we wring our hands and say, what a shame that they're wasting the capabilities and the intelligence of half their population. Well, if we look internally, no law firm, no legal law department, public or private, should be cutting itself off or even quietly allowing any portion of its potential team not to be excelling at the highest level. So if we have colleagues in 2016 who still need to be told this isn't just the right thing to do, it's good business, shame on us. Seriously, we should be that's okay to talk about why we now print on two sides and do other socially good things that we think. This isn't that. We're well past it. So that's my 2 cents.
I might add the same point about performance. I've spent most of my business life building high-performance teams, whether it's with clients or within my own firm, which was McKinsey & Company, where I was for 30 years. And if you cannot build a high-performance team, you cannot serve your clients well. And the research, it was intuitive before, but the latest research has nailed pretty well the characteristics of high-performing teams. I've forgotten one of them, but I remember two that are related. One is the level of emotional intelligence on those teams. As my friends have said, beyond that, the teams that are high performing in control groups are disproportionately staffed with women. And so the science and the research makes pretty clear that if you want performance, that an organization is inclusive and really committed to that, as these guys have said.
David, do you have anything to add to that?
Geez, they took everything. I was going to say all of these things, but
That's the problem with going last. I'll try to ask you first next time.
The one thing just to piggyback on what everybody said so far, the proof has been in the pudding, so to speak, because when women have gotten involved, the organizations, our law firm is a happier and better performing place, and I think that's true of all organizations. And we think about lawyers and partners and all that stuff. Well, we have a lot of staff. There's a lot of women on our staff. It makes a big deal to them that we are inclusive and promoting women as well as men in the partnership ranks.
So, just, Jim, to build on your statement about, really wanting to have a high-performing team and high-performing members of that team, what particular attributes do you look for? And this is probably in men and women, so I don't want to say just in women, but what attributes are you looking for when you are considering someone, whether it's for partnership in the law firm or a leadership position, either with the bank or with McKinsey? Maybe you can talk a little bit about what you look for, and I'd be interested in each of you and what you're looking for.
I think David gets to go first.
David, okay, you can go first.
Well, can I amend the question?
Yes, you can amend the question. Oh my gosh, none of the women gave the moderator this hard a time, did they?
Well, I thought about this concept before. Kathy did give us a little bit of a snippet as to what we might be talking about. And I would caution that I think there's a difference between partnership attributes and leadership attributes. And as I think about that, the partnership criteria really are about seeing the candidate as someone who can be an effective partner in our firm, and that entails delivering extraordinary client service, working well with everybody else in the firm, having a developed area of expertise. Those are some of the things that go into it. And not every partner is going to be a candidate for leadership. I think that's especially true in professional service firms. There's a lot of room for different types of personalities and contributions in the employed lawyer and partnership ranks at any one of our firms. When we talk about leaders, we're talking about people who can lead in a professional services firm. We are mainly consensus-driven organizations. And so leaders in law firms and at McKinsey, and we'll let Paul talk about this from the bank's perspective, need to have the ability to relate to people, have empathy, and then to be able to have vision and bring people along towards that goal. It's not a top-down, environment. Arguably, no business is today, but law firms certainly aren't. And so when we look at leadership candidates, we are looking at those kinds of criteria and seeing if they're if the people have the right mix.
David, you want to?
Paul, it's yours.
Okay. I was just thinking of this as I was listening to David. So there were 5 things I'm going to mention quickly, but I think 3 of them might have a gender quality to them that advantages women. And what I can't figure out, what I'll think about is, I may have just said that because I think about them, these are the newest things I think about when I think about hiring someone, and it's probably a function of the fact that I've been interviewing more women, and we've been hiring more women, and I think I'm learning about some of the differences that can be an advantage to the firm, to our company. I use the word firm it's just a thing we say rather than company. So, but things to look for, no surprise, content, domain deep, really knows the material well. And the other one I would say that's not necessarily relative to gender is what I call the weirdometer. It's the meter that measures weirdness. And
Which scale, which end of the pole do you look for?
the one you want to be on.
Yeah, okay.
This is something we learned at Denison, by the way.
Yeah. But the bad hires I've had I've always looked back and there's some kind of quirky thing that I just absolutely missed. So that has become important to me. But the things I'm really looking for that are new in my thinking is, number one, I don't even look at someone relative to what they might be able to accomplish on their own. I really look at them as a member of a team. And are they going to be a great teammate? Can they lead, and at times lead from behind and be a great teammate? That's one. And then I mentioned this when I mentioned I get to work with Kristen Baird-Adams. He's a horizontal thinker, finds connections among what appear to be disparate facts and data points. Just if there's 2 data points, you can extend it into about 5, put them all together horizontally and come up with a leverageable point of view on something that we didn't even think about before. I think about that quite a bit. And then kind of this notion of selfless goes along with being a great teammate, goes along with collaborating and finding connections, but there's something else about that. It's more of a personal quality. It's more about not, again, that notion of there will be times when I lead, there will be times when I'm a member of a team, and my best job is to facilitate or to convene and do things like that. So that's what we look for, and I do think there's, at least in my own thinking, I guess there's a notion of several of those, I think, advantage women in the hiring process, which is good.
I hope it's true that as I look at colleagues or candidates for leadership within the firm or to join the firm, I hope it's true that I'm looking for the same thing from a female candidate as I am from a male candidate. if there's any way in which I skew that, it would probably be that I do not go out of my way with female colleagues or candidates to look for a nurturing personality or a high level of emotional intelligence. I value emotional intelligence. I hope I have some. I think Michelle would agree. We've got some outstanding colleagues who are not real high on the emotional intelligence scale, and we need a lot of different personalities in a law firm. And so I would hope, to the extent there are law students among us, that it is great that there are things we think are distinctively female in terms of contribution to an overall culture, but I hope no one of you ever feels obligated to convey that in any way that's at odds with your personality. We have male colleagues all over the spectrum, and I'm glad to say we have female colleagues all over the spectrum as well. So,
just building on what they've said, and I'll just fast forward to people developing men and women into partners, and two thoughts that come together more as coaching tips, I guess, or just as observations. I've never seen someone be successful in the situations that I'm in, and particularly a professional firm that does not have a champion, not a network, but someone who is committed to that woman or that man. And part of the commitment to the woman or man is going to be their commitment to the firm and to a career as a partner. And I guess from observation, I would say that women struggle with that, hardly a surprise, but in two ways. One, do I really want to be what you guys are or what I see women and female partners doing? Is that, given my plans for family, the way I want to live my life, what I want to be doing? Or when we've worked hard to have part-time programs for women who need them and want them, then to feel guilty and ambivalent themselves about taking advantage of the part-time program, feeling that, gee, they weren't able to come on Friday because they don't come in on Friday, they let their colleagues down, and so on. So I guess if one is going to have a champion, male or female, each of you, in your careers, I think you have to be clear in your own mind about what is the commitment that you would make back to the firm, because the champion will invest his or her time and energy. Every single woman who's been successful that I've seen has a champion, and I was thinking over them. I can name them. I can say who was the guy who got that woman elected partner, who was the woman who backed that man, and so on.
Would that be your experience? I guess all three of you, would you have that same opinion about having a champion, or I think sometimes we call it a sponsor? What's your view on that?
Yeah, I think that's an important concept, and that's not a gender-specific concept, as you said, Jim. I mean, the people who are, I think, very successful, almost everyone has a sponsor, and like you, Jim, as I think back over it, I can think, and they're not labeled sponsors, but they're people that have status in the firm, have access to power, or are in powerful positions, and that's a whole other topic we should probably talk about. Is the concept of power, and I don't mean that in a gross sense, but just who makes decisions in the firm, how are decisions made, and what kind of input goes into those decisions in whatever firm you're involved with, or company, or whatever. But you need a sponsor, and so I would say, the point of advice. I didn't come with my 10 tips, but maybe Jim will amplify on this. But the bit of advice is for you to think about who is your sponsor or sponsors, and if you don't have one, how do you develop the relationship with a more senior person that can give you that kind of support? It's a relationship question. And it's something that makes a big difference.
Just to build on that particular point, I've seen decades of meetings where the partnership group sits around and says, and goes through all the senior associates or partner candidates, and says, gee, that's a pretty good person, we ought to be supportive. So as their managing partner, I said, okay, or we knew by then, who is this person's champion, who is going to fight? And we did this in recruiting as well. Who's going to fight to bring this person, even bad on the weirdo meter, into the place, because that foretold success. And if the partners said, yeah, a really good person, we'd like to hire him. No. Really good person, really good woman, we'd like to promote her for the sake of diversity and balance to the partnership. No, because no champion and someone to fight and invest in making that person successful.
Yeah, I just bring up the notion of the difference between mentors and sponsors. Just in my own story, I've had I've had a number of great mentors. Two I'll talk about for just a second. And mentors, I think, are often someone who's older, someone who's been with the firm longer, someone who has more experience, maybe broader experience. In my case, it's just the opposite. Just the opposite. My first mentor was a guy by the name of Frank Bird. Frank, I'm not sure Frank graduated from high school. Yet he took this college kid with a history degree out of Denison University and kind of taught me how to work the streets and be a client person. He took me to buy a blue suit, a white shirt, and a tie. Not the same one, David. Yeah, it's different. Same size, though.
Nice tie.
As I was when I was 22. But he helped me, and mentors take me through changes. They take me through changes in my career in a big way. Frank took me from that change from college to work. And then, interestingly, the most current example I would offer is a young woman that we recruited from the University of Pennsylvania, an electrical engineer, came into our development program in our operations and technology area, and in the first year digitized a process that saved us $4 million. She led our LGBTA group. And a few years ago, our youngest of two sons came out as gay, and she helped me as a parent get through that whole personal situation in a way that I could never have imagined. And I'm forever grateful for what she did and how she helped myself get through that. So again, a very different type of situation. Sponsors were sponsors. Dave Dabrico was my sponsor. He took me by the back of the neck and threw me into situations I had no business being in, and had the confidence that I'd learn, try to get better at it. He also demoted me. I got demoted, I had my salary cut by 25%, and did it in a way that I was sort of saying, yeah, it makes sense. And he relifted me up and threw me into another situation. And I feel, doubly blessed to have had mentors, but I'm not sure mentors are the folks who will really advance you in the firm, really fight for you, Jim, to use your point. In my case, it was Dabrico who fought for me. I'm sure the board wanted to can me, and I somehow got them not to do that. And the rest has been working out pretty well. So big difference between mentors and sponsors.
I agree that there is a distinction. I think both mentors and sponsors are of critical importance. As I think back over my career and the careers of others I've watched, though, it seems to me the ones that really worked were the ones that happened organically. And it wasn't the case that somebody, either a young attorney spotted somebody older and said, would you be my mentor or sponsor? Nor certainly was it the case, and I know we do this, and under my term as office managing partner, but I think it's a horrible idea to assign mentors. It's like assigning friends. If it didn't happen in a way that arose naturally out of the working relationship that developed between a junior attorney and a more senior one, it's not really going to have the intended benefit. So I know this sounds like a Zen koan or something, but if you go looking to create a mentorship or even a sponsorship, it probably won't happen if you do the best you can to create a really positive working relationship. it will happen. And I know that begs the question, why did we, and I don't think our firm was alone in getting to the point of assigning mentors? Well, it was because I think it's the same reason we give every kid a ribbon, at the soccer match or something. We don't want anybody not to have one. But I think two things. One is people will, that is an aptitude like learning how to do the substantive part of our job. The other thing I think we tend to undervalue is the great benefit to the mentors. There's few things that I've had greater gratification from over my career than the people I've had the opportunity to mentor. And so I think that's where we really ought to be selling it. We're constantly telling our young lawyers, you need a mentor. We ought to be reminding our older lawyers, you need a mentee, not because the firm demands it, but because it's one of the most gratifying, satisfying aspects of our career as lawyers.
I think the reason, agreeing completely, and that it can't be designated, I think the way it's earned by men and women is the two things. To be kind of clear as much as you can is your own, what your personal brand is, what you stand for in the balance between substantive competence, teamwork, and engaging people skills, client relationship capabilities, and what you stand for. One element of that in building trust is to keep your self-orientation as low as manageable, and so to care about your senior colleagues and help make their people with pressures and families, probably more pressures than associates have on income generation and so on. And rather than seeing them as someone in a hierarchy who makes your life miserable, you are there seeing them as a human being who is a colleague. And when your sense of yourself and having a personal brand and caring about your colleagues that you work with, including the senior ones, then what David says happens, because I was always drawn to people who made my life easier and appreciated what I was struggling with. And when I had kids, young ones, rather later on, when I told the client, I'm out of here at 6 o'clock, and I'm always home for dinner from Canton. I've got to be back in Cleveland by whatever time. My more junior colleagues would say, have at it and go ahead, I understand, and I'll help cover on this one. So I really appreciated the caring as well as, or more than someone who could just get the work done.
So we've talked a little bit about the difference between sponsorship and being a mentor. Can you guys, and I'm going to start with you, David Goodman, can you give me some examples of something that you did that will demonstrate one versus the other?
One
sponsorship versus a mentor type of activity.
Well, one thing I look back on with particular gratitude that I think is important in the mentor-mentee relationship is that I think when we think as young attorneys about who might be a good mentor for me, we extrapolate from ourselves and we want to find somebody who is us 20 years later. And in my early years at CalFE, my mentor was someone whose personality could not have been more different, whose bundle of aptitudes was really fundamentally different from mine. But I learned more as before I became a public finance lawyer. I was a couple or 3 years a corporate securities lawyer. And I learned more from somebody who was a devoted mentor, but who had an entirely different skill set and bundle of attitudes, that it rounded me out more effectively than had I found somebody who had my same, was on my same place on Paul's weirdness spectrum. I wouldn't have benefited as much at all. And on the other side, I think that same ability I'm going to get back to Jim's point. I do think, though I sometimes, and I think lawyers generally, when we hear about our personal brand and so on, we sort of cringe a little because we're not as, we don't think, I think, as a profession as much of ourselves that way. But I often find it's most helpful to me to ask, what would I do if I weren't me? How would I be thinking about this situation if I didn't bring this bundle of preconceptions and biases and everything I know I bring, whether I want to or not. So I don't tend to ask so much, worry too much about being to mine own self true, but to some best self I've seen in others who I know have handled that situation well. So I like to think, without being too specific, Kathy, that there have been times when I have been the champion for somebody who was not the obvious candidate for me to be a champion for. And I didn't do it with any element of sacrifice. I did it with even more enthusiasm, I think, than I would have if I thought I was doing it for a mini-me. So that's kind of a muddled.
That was great. Thank you. Paul.
Catherine, I think that for me, the sponsorship, in my story, the sponsorship piece is always around something that is fundamentally additive to the firm, right? It drives revenue or it saves expenses, whatever the issue might be. But it's a very real, tangible, pretty quick payback for that being lifted up by the neck. The one I would cite was back in 2000. Bill McDonald asked me to go to a conference room and meet Shelley Seifert, who I had known but never really worked with. And he kind of came in and spent about a minute saying, what I want you to do is think about how do we drive better business results in the women's business segment, women business owner segment. And that was really the beginning of that effort. And again, Bill just sort of lifted me up and threw me in the conference room. We recruited internally a woman by the name of Beth Marcello, who still continues to work this multicultural channel for us, the Women's Business Owner Channel. Again, as I mentioned, it's the fastest growing piece of our banking business, business banking part of our firm. But it wouldn't have happened unless Bill kind of said, this is what we're going to do and we want you to do it. It began our first affinity group. Our affinity groups are called Employee Business Resource Groups. And the very first one that we started was around the women in our company. We're very proud of a lot of the awards that PNC wins around a great place to work for women. And it all kind of comes back to Bill kind of throwing Shelley and I in this room and said, figure this one out.
David, I would have said that you were my champion when he came to the New York office and asked if I would be willing to run that. And I really felt at that point in time that I had a champion, that he had enough confidence in me to take our office forward and to make it more successful. And it was a great feeling.
It was a great decision on my part.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad that you think that. Jim, was there anything that you wanted to add on that about the sponsorship? Because I think, one of the things that I worry about a little bit in what was said here is that everybody's agreed that you need to have someone and that you need to have a champion to help you with, in some of these circumstances and trying to move up in your organization. And I get a little bit of a feeling that there isn't a way for a person to take control of that and try to figure out a way, how do I get a sponsor and what actions can I take? I mean, we're all action oriented, right? So what actions can I take? Jim, is there anything that someone can do other than the organic method we've been talking about? And if it's no, then I'm sorry I put you on the spot, but.
Well, this maybe is or isn't helpful depending on each person's context. The way I think we had it work pretty well at McKinsey was the partnership group was collectively responsible for each individual there. whether it was a man or a woman, was indifferent, and we spent a lot of time and energy as a collectivity saying we are going to be successful if we are committed to developing these people, and we were then very systematic about how we did it and creating opportunities. So we had a staffing process, much harder in a law firm and harder in the corporate segment to move people around, but we just insisted that there be multiple exposures and multiple opportunities to work with different people so that there were more at-bats. If you're in a practice group and you only see one senior partner or two, and you don't have an at-bat, or you don't have an at-bat in firm leadership activities or community work with other partners, I think it's a lot harder. So I guess it would be to encourage anything you can do in your own firm, either to encourage your colleagues, or if you're in a leadership position, to have a way of energizing and developing your more junior colleagues and giving them opportunities, and have that as a collective responsibility is, I think, about the one way that I've seen that you can really make it easier for those connections to occur.
Kathy, would I?
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, David.
Well, what I would say is we may have been given the impression that we think we've had colleagues, had or have colleagues who have been outstanding but somehow just got left standing up in a game of musical chairs because nobody stepped up to be her mentor or champion. In most cases, I think, in many cases, mentorship and championship end up being kind of a product of revisionist history. Somebody has excelled so much that others look back and say, well, of course, I was her mentor and I was her champion. It doesn't really need, it's not the case that there's some form that needed to be filled out and nobody filled out yours. I don't know of a case where a truly outstanding performer suffered for lack of that. What I would say is there are, getting back to one of my earlier points, there are so many ways in which individuals can contribute to a law firm, and some are harder to discern than others. And so if you are a contributor that's in one of the more unusual ways, then it does help greatly to have somebody standing by to say, you know, it is great that you're doing what you're doing that way, but think about the way you handled that situation impressed others, and internally to have somebody else say, I know sometimes this person may rub you the wrong way, but trust me, I have seen this person handle some of the most difficult, stressful client situations and excel beyond anybody's expectations. So, you know, it isn't just a form or a box that needs to be checked.
Just a 20-seconder in support of that, because notwithstanding all the rigor and processes, it all get often boiled down to banal, not banal, but very simple statements. You want to be a partner, act like a partner. And that gets to a whole host of what does that mean in the particular context you're in. But outstanding people sort of, that's pretty clear, as David was saying. And the other little saying we had is, in the end, the clients elect our partners. So what we're really doing is just confirming performance and the whole range of client skills. The clients vote, really, and we sort of endorse that voting.
Well, let me flip this around a little bit. I mean, because what's going through my mind is that there is, I would say that the people who are successful all have some mentor and sponsorship relationship. I mean, it might not be so clear, but they've gotten that kind of support. And those that don't are the ones that usually fail in our firms. And so when you're thinking about this in your own careers, this doesn't mean like you have to be the managing partner of the firm, and how am I going to get there? It's how am I going to be a good lawyer? How am I going to service clients well? How am I going to develop the areas of experience that are going to make me valuable in my field? And then you think, okay, and then you start to pick your role models, and you can model behavior, you can develop relationships, but it is organic. But I suggest you have to be asking yourself those questions as you go through your practice, and it really is all the way through. I would say, Kathy, I think we did have a sponsorship relationship, but we also had a mentor kind of relationship. I mean, when I was a managing partner, I would talk to each of our partners in charge, and it wasn't like do this, do that. It was, tell me what's going on. Tell me what the issues are. Have you thought about this? I think those were important conversations too.
I agree. Let's turn a little bit to a different topic, and that is one that we spent, we had one of the breakout sessions about it today, and we typically talk about it a lot in these types of forums, and that is networks and networking and how that helps or not in your career. Can you guys comment on what you see in the value of networks and maybe what we can be doing in terms of building our networks? Maybe, Paul, can I start with you?
Sure. Just a couple of thoughts, again, based observations and things we think about at the bank, because connections are important. Networks. One of the coaching things we do, especially with young development trainees we bring in usually after they're undergraduate, is, networking is not an end. Right? It's the end is not, I went to an event and I picked up 40 business cards. Okay, great. Did you talk to anybody? Well, not really. I was running around trying to get business cards.
Isn't that the game you play at these events? Like, I got more business cards than you did.
Maybe that's what I'm missing out on. I didn't know that part. But I mean, it's the connections are important. For us, networking is how we get our jobs done. We're a big company that runs a model of locality. And so we're not big on org charts. We are big on creating a network of colleagues who will help you get your job done in an extraordinary way, and where you can help them do the same. And those networks, they are organic. We really watch, because usually there's one or two people that end up doing a lot of things for other people because they're so good at what they do. And you have to find ways to connect. When we try to connect with a client, we do an extraordinary amount of prep work, right? We think, we strategize, really try to understand the best value add we can bring to a client in any interaction we have with them. And what we try to coach people on is, you ought to do the same thing when you're trying to create a network internally. You ought to think of that network internally as kind of a client network, and you ought to have the same prep. If someone wants to talk about football and you know nothing about it, find something else. Do the prep work, just as you would with a client. Find about music or food or whatever it might be. Those connections are really important. And what we learn from that is also, how do you develop communication styles? Because the communication styles will be different depending on maybe what the network is, but you need to understand that there's going to be a different style that's effective in different networks that you have. So we think a lot about it. It's not an end, it's a means to get your job done, and if you want to do your job in an extraordinary way, you will create an extraordinary network. We also think networks, in the banking business, like the law business or the consulting business, new business. You will distinguish yourself by bringing in new business. And that often results from a network of people that you develop outside. And it's important to develop a network just for your own self-improvement. I always think if I were my own company, or I owned a company, who would my board of directors be? That's who kind of I surround myself with, to try to learn and try to get better and try to improve all the time. So obviously important.
This is one where I think women have brought a new dimension. I think that when I started practicing, the networks were, to the extent that we had networks or thought about them, they were mainly men, getting together. And this was a frustrating thing for women in the profession who were bumping up against that. And what has been very interesting to me is watch how women's networks have grown. How some existing networks became, welcoming to both genders, but that the women in particular have taken the initiative to develop a network. And I think all of our firms and companies have these. I mean, at Thompson, we call it the Women's Initiative, and I've been amazed at the success of the women in our firm building relationships with women in other businesses, and of course it helps. I mean, it helps advance the image of the firm. You might get some business out of it. You're going to meet interesting people and learn from it, all the things that Paul was talking about. And so that's been a very healthy change in the way life has gone on, I think.
This is going to sound like another one of my Zen koans here, but I think obviously we're in a personal service business, and forming strong, trusting, personal relationships with potential clients, with referral sources, and with other attorneys is essential. But it's been my experience that if you go to any event or you join any board or put yourself in any other seeming networking situation with a very specific idea of what you're going to get out of it, you'll get nothing out of it. You need to put yourself in a situation with an open mind and as a good listener, and find yourself asking not what can this person I just met do for me, what can I do for her or him? And I don't read a lot of kind of MBA books, but there's a professor at Wharton, Adam Grant, who wrote a book called Give and Take that explores the premise that I think we all think that people who just give, they respond every time somebody wants a recommendation or to brainstorm, could we just talk for 10 minutes, that the people who always say yes are doormats. They get used up and they don't advance themselves. And with rigorous empirical research, he proves just the opposite, that people who make a point of not asking first, what am I going to get out of this, end up in the long run. They may get used up disproportionately early on, but over time, they do end up benefiting and having a higher sense of happiness from their work. So I know this runs counter to what I said earlier about not slipping into a stereotype about women lawyers or women professionals, that you're more giving than self-seeking. But I think we all could stand in our networking efforts to think more in that way and come away with those 20 or 40 business cards, but with each one think, what can I do to let that person know I'm thinking of her or thinking of him? What news article or new development or something can I say, from what you told me, I thought not in a totally, I'm going to get something back, but because you're throwing, casting seeds.
Yeah, that's the premise of a book by Reid Hoffman called The Startup of You. He's one of the founders of LinkedIn, which makes networking a digitally easier thing to do. But the other thing that book brings out, which is a coaching we do, is volunteer. When someone asks you to do something, say yes. You never know where it's going to take you. You'll never know who you're going to meet, the experiences you'll have, whether it's internal or external. And we really try to coach people. This is not a gender thing, but really try to coach people to volunteer so as to have more opportunity, Jim, to your point, more at-bats, to create those networks that can be, necessary, maybe not sufficient, but necessary to have a great career advancement.
Well, if you were to add the not-for-profit world in our town, there are many, many opportunities and mechanisms to get involved, and it seems like a good thing before getting involved, as you're talking with that organization, is to figure out what your particular contribution is going to be and set aside time to do it, because they're usually very scarce on tangible contributions. There are a lot of people who are there who don't do much, and being on these organizations and contributing, as David said, and doing something and making a difference builds a network about as fast as anything I can imagine, because you've really given something rather than joining it.
So we're getting towards the end of our conversation here, and we've talked about a lot of good things that women can be doing and are doing to advance their careers. I'd like to talk a little bit about what women do that hurt their chances at advancement, or that make the challenge for them a little bit greater. And I'm not going to talk about the Good Old Boys Network. I think we all think that that's still there and that's still an issue. But I'd like to talk a little bit more about what do we do that gets in our own way. Jim.
Well, I will start with
I'm like Exhibit A, I know.
Well, I'll start with a very tangible one, having spent a lot of time coaching McKinsey partners and women among the partnership and developing their skills in developing trust with clients. So it's a deep 5-day immersion with role-playing, and you see laid out several things which women do. One, at a very tactical level, is to not be consistent in voice modulation. So getting emotionally involved, the voice goes up and peership with the clients in the room, because we play the clients in these, or having a difference in even the way voice and quiet confidence and interactive skills I've seen be a bit harder for women to be consistent. So that's a very granular sort of thing, but it is quite disconcerting in building trust and giving the sense of peership. The other thing which women have struggled with more is the mindset of being a peer with a client, bringing value, and having the confidence to be well regarded. The duck on the shoulder, the duck you need to shut up, is the one that's whispering, shut the duck up. What the duck is whispering is, this is a guy, he's older than you are, he doesn't really care what you think, and he will behave, this client, traditionally like a male, and so the duck keeps quacking. And so coming across as with the self-confidence and the peership, the matter of mindset in every single interaction you have, I have found to be tougher for women, not particularly needing coaching and not particularly easy or intuitive to come by because of the voices that the women are diminishing themselves with. And as you explore this, as I've explored it time and time again, it's really quite telling the degree to which many of you impose that handicap on yourselves.
We started with the point that we've made progress, but nowhere near as much as we'd like. So I think it would be naive for any woman at any level of the legal profession to think that sexist bias, whether hidden or otherwise, is a thing of the past. So how do you respond to the fact that you are part of a group that has historically and continues to be on the wrong end of bias and prejudice? And there are some healthy ways I've seen people do it, and others not so much. So one not healthy way is to be totally oblivious to it and not think you're going to encounter it everywhere. The other related mirror image, not so healthy way, is to see it absolutely everywhere and put everybody around you on edge, thinking every remark. And I am not, I hope my colleagues would attest, I am not somebody who is in a managerial role ever condoned anything like locker room banter or a boys will be boys attitude. But having, and this is a challenge that women attorneys face that men don't, and that is you have to strike that balance. It's something like Reagan's old trust but verify, it's trust but respond. I mean, when you do see some form of bias or worse, be prepared to respond to it and not just assume it's you. As I suppose, and this is a more sensitive point, but of the less helpful way I've seen women colleagues respond is to assume that because women have been on the wrong end of bias, that advancement is a zero-sum game. And that in order for you to advance, it's got to be at the expense of someone else. And there's nothing worse, whether it's men or women, but because of the historical situation, I think it's more likely to show up among women, that notion of undercutting in any way your colleagues to advance, it is toxic. It's toxic to your career and to the firm. So that would be the least healthy, helpful, and effective way to respond to bias that I hope that 40 years hence, it will be the historical curiosity that I hoped it would be by now.
Yeah, I'd like to, I had the same thought when I was thinking about this. And the way I said it to myself as I was getting ready was, don't make it a women's issue when there are other explanations. There are, by the way, if there is a harassment issue that is blatant, you should report it and pursue it and get it resolved. But to come into, and I've had this happen to me over the years, where I've been in a committee chair or leadership position, and somebody comes in and says, well, I'm being discriminated against because I'm a woman. And now, think about how I feel about that. That's accusing me of being biased. And so what happens? My hackles go up, right? I mean, if there is a way to approach it, and it's not about, unless there truly is overt discrimination, tackle it on the merits. I've got these skills, these are my goals, I want to achieve this, or we want to, and I don't make it a women's issue unless it really is for sure a woman's issue. The other thing that, and I hate to generalize about any women or men on this point, but one thing which has struck me from time to time is the women don't seem, and again, gross generalization, don't get the organizational governance structure of our firm as well as the men do. And that's just learning, that's just understanding my point earlier about power and decision making. How do things work here? I think if you're going to be part of a firm with aspirations to be a partner or into leadership, you've got to be intellectually curious from day one as to, okay, well, how's this work here? Who runs things? Who controls the budgets? Who makes promotions? How are client affairs managed? If those things aren't going through your mind, they should be, because that's really the guts of the financial and governance side of a professional service firm. And I've had people come in, and I said, you know what? It doesn't work that way. This is the way it works here, and these are the kinds of things that have to line up for that goal to be achieved. Oh, I didn't realize that. And so I like people who take an interest in those things and come in well prepared.
Catherine, I think my answer is not around gender. because I see it in a variety of different situations. I see it with young people in our company. I see it with the African American employees that we have. I see it in a variety of different areas. And again, it gets back to this notion of what's necessary and what's sufficient. And I guess I'd describe it as kind of checking the box. So I'll use people that join our company, and we sit with them and we spend a lot of time kind of with a checklist of things that they're going to have to accomplish over a period of time. And in anywhere from a day to a couple of months, they'll run back and say, checked it, got it. What's next? Where's my promotion? And it's, those things are necessary, but they're not sufficient to get to where they want to go. And what always is at the core of everything we think about is the work. It's the foundational threshold issue. The work needs to be extraordinary. It needs to be the work that's better than anybody else doing a similar role. That's what we keep coming back to. And as we're coaching people, we have all these ideas about what to do, but at the end of the day, you can do all that stuff, but if the work's not there, it's not going to happen. And we've got to get a lot better, I think, in our firm about having those very clear discussions about the difference between the boxes and the foundation of any sustainable long-term career, which is the work.
Can I add another one? Sure. Yeah, one that occurs to me in, I guess it would be client interactions, is the way of developing a trust-based relationship or with the client. And there's something called the trust equation that some of you may know. David Maister, who writes about professional services firms, underscores the trust equation, and it says that trust is a function of C, credibility, plus R, reliability, plus I, he uses the word intimacy, by which he means rapport, but it's sort of a shocking word. Those are, you add them on the numerator, and the denominator is self-orientation. So it's more about you, and that's shown in little things, looking at your watch, checking your phone, or things where you really don't have the client fully in mind. I think what women are inclined to do because of skills or uncomfortableness with the rapport or intimacy side is go to the credibility and the expertise side to show what they know. That means they, as a generalization, talk too much, have 10 things to say, we did this, I did this, here's my expertise, my firm does this and that, when what they should do is what you teach in this is question-based. So what are you really hoping, if we were to do this work, what would be useful to you? What are you really trying to accomplish here? What would it mean to you personally? A question-based way of interacting with clients rather than an assertion and credibility and expertise-based. That would be my observation in professional services firms generally. And I think, so the coaching tip is check yourselves on, read chapter 8 of The Trusted Advisor by David Maister, and you see all the behaviors which tend to not use that equation well. Do you guys see that by gender in
Because the men talk just as much as the women do, by the way.
well, lawyers generally are much,
Lawyers are horrible
they're
on
much
this
worse
point.
than consultants in that.
I actually, Jim,
I know one.
Horrible.
I am a lawyer. I mean, I do have a law degree. I failed, but I do have a law degree.
I don't know that I would quite. I see it in both sides of people, and I think that the general proposition that you are offering for this audience, and they could be the men here as well, if they were men, is listen and ask and don't yak and brag. I mean. Kathy, this goes back to when we were, I'll make this quick, but we were hiring a real estate broker for our New York office. This was before you were partner in charge. And so I went up there and to look at things, and they said, well, you got to meet these brokers. And oh, this one broker's great. We went into their office and they put up, the big, we've done this deal and we've done that deal, and we've done this deal and we've done that deal, and we are the best. And okay, well, sound pretty good. Went to the next guy and he said, look, you're a law firm. Here are the things that I know you're going to want to be thinking about. You're going to, and they showed us the spreadsheet that he would prepare for our partners to understand how the costs would be borne and what 3 different law firms that they'd worked for had found, important in the decision-making process. It was such an easy decision, and it was asking questions, putting themselves in our shoes, and that's what we all want to do when we're dealing with our clients.
So I think we're at the end here, but we would entertain a question or two if there's a burning question out there from any of you.
Hi, my question is, the 4 of you all come with some great perspectives on this. You've all thought about this question for a long time. You recognize the concept of implicit bias and all of those things. What advice do you have for working with people, male and female, who don't get it?
Well, I
Stump the
think
panel.
scolding and reprimanding are not so great. I think the best way to cajole people to a better, more enlightened point of view is point out all the benefits that redounded to others and to the firm when somebody did take a tack that showed he was aware that he had been biased, and because he dealt with it, he put himself and the firm in a much better situation. So I think the more you can make that aberrant point of view isolated and make those people feel they aren't the mainstream. That isn't the way business gets done. It's not the old boys network. We're past Mad Men, that is, it takes time and patience, and it's not as emotionally rewarding as getting on a soapbox and pointing a finger at somebody, but over time I think it works.
I think that the way to win somebody on that point is by showing that person that you can really do excellent work. And you may get that opportunity directly. I mean, they may come to you and say, this guy may come to you and say, do this assignment for me. But if you've identified that person, let's say somebody that you like the kind of work that he does and the clients he's representing, and you're not getting the opportunities, I would go find your friends, who probably men, who are working for that guy, and say, what, I'm not getting any work from him, or how do I break through with this person? How does he like to do his business? What kinds of things would he be interested in? I mean, it's got to be done at a almost granular level in order to build that relationship.
I would ask you a question and see if you have anybody in the audience has an intuition. Even going way back to the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation times, generally men with daughters were far, far less, what would be the right word, viewed women less stereotypically. And the question of, well, what if your daughter, around here we're seeing so-and-so, what if your daughter encountered that? Is what would it be like, or how would you feel about that, is a way to get do you generally find that men with daughters are more enlightened than those that aren't? Marianne, I guess.
When I went to Squire Sanders, is it on? Yeah. The head of the corporate department was Jim Sheedy. His daughter was in my class at Case Western Reserve Law School. I relaxed immediately. I didn't ask any questions. I was just sure that he would treat me like he would want his daughter to be treated. And it turned out to be true. But, I was the first woman in corporate, I think. And he was just fabulous. And I'm sure daughter did it.
We're relating to a different time frame, Marianne, than some of the people in this firm, but in this room. But Jim, in your study, the thing that I would have guessed would also be men with working spouses would be. That was a big influence on me. I mean, my wife worked, when we got here, and worked for 30 years, or she did retire, but 35 years, I guess. And yet at our firm, a lot, if you go back to 1975, men were showing up to start work and their wives were, at home. And I could not relate to that concept when, we're talking about, okay, who's going to get the groceries and how are we going to get the car serviced and all of those things. And I think today that that dynamic is much more prevalent. I think people who are from two-income families, they get it.
So I guess the answer, if we're saying which ones are the better ones to work with, and your question is how to work with those that aren't, I guess it would be broaden to the extent you can the number of people within your firm or your company that you work with, so that you choose that more than just what practice group or what. Think of that as part of your decision making on how you broaden your network.
Okay, well, thank you all very much. This was really terrific. I appreciate your time and your willingness to be in front of this hostile audience. And I don't want to get in the way of our group and cocktails, but thank you all very much. It was really terrific.
For what has been a really fabulous day. I listened to the last piece of that and I had to think to myself, it will be a really good thing when we can say the men whose mothers actually were very successful people and can think, how would you feel if somebody talked to your mother that way? Because we don't have to think about them, only their daughters or their wives at that point. Raising a son right now with my husband as the primary caretaker, it does occur to me that when he gets to that point, I certainly hope he's not just thinking about his children. I hope he's thinking about his parents and friends of his mom. So we actually go from here into a networking reception. We're inviting everybody to please join us. If you have a piece of paper where you're trying to get CLE credit, please make sure that you drop that off for us at the desk. Otherwise, it's been a fabulous day. Thank you all of you who spoke, all of you who have participated. It's really been a wonderful time, and I greatly appreciate it. Thanks.